Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. The lantern's gentle glow. The village lay quietly at the foot of the mountains, surrounded by rice fields that shimmered with the reflection of the sky. It was a place where time seemed to walk at a slower pace, where the days unfolded not by the ticking of clocks but by the rhythm of nature itself. In this village, there was an ancient custom every year, at the turning of summer into autumn. The people lit lanterns and placed them along the river that flowed gently past their homes. The festival was not for spectacle or grandeur, but to honor the spirits of those who had gone before, and to remind the living that light continues, even while passing shadows. Aya had grown up watching the River of Lanterns every year. As a child, she remembered clutching her grandmother's hand, staring in awe as the small flames drifted down the water like stars fallen from the night sky. Her grandmother would whisper, "Each flame is a memory, each glow a prayer." They float not only for the dead, but for the living who carry their light forward. Those words lingered with Aya through her youth, even as she grew older and the world outside the village called to her. She had left the village for the city in her 20s, chasing work and opportunities, determined to carve her own life. Years passed swiftly. She rarely returned, except for brief visits, until her grandmother's passing finally brought her back. The house felt emptier without the old woman's voice, but the memory of those festivals, the lanterns flickering in the dusk, returned vividly. That year, Aya felt an irresistible pull to stay, at least until the festival once again arrived. When the time came, Aya volunteered to help with the preparations. The lanterns were crafted from thin paper, folded carefully around a bamboo frame, each holding a candle at its heart. The villagers gathered together, their hands moving with practiced care, their conversations hushed yet warm. Aya sat among them, fingers clumsy at first, but slowly remembering the rhythm of folding, tying, and shaping. She noticed how each lantern bore its small imperfections, creases in the paper, uneven knots, but once lit, each would shine as if perfect. On the evening of the festival, the air was touched by the scent of ripening fields and distant pine. The sky deepened into indigo as villagers gathered along the banks of the river. Aya carried her lantern with both hands, feeling the delicate paper flutter against her palms. Inside, she had written a small message to her grandmother, words of gratitude and longing. The moment came. Lanterns were lit one by one, their flames trembling but steady. Aya crouched by the water's edge, watching her reflection mingle with the glow of her lantern. For a brief second, she hesitated, unsure if she could release it, afraid that letting it go meant letting her grandmother drift farther away. But then she remembered the whisper: each flame is a memory, each glow a prayer. With a deep breath, she set the lantern upon the water. It floated gently, joining the others, carried downstream by the slow current. Aya's eyes followed it until she could no longer tell which was hers. The river became a galaxy of lights, each flame carrying countless stories. The soft murmur of the crowd fell into silence as everyone stood, watching together. It felt as though the entire village was breathing in unison, their hearts bound by the same quiet reverence. As Aya gazed, she felt her grandmother's presence not in the lantern itself, but in the way the lights shimmered across the water, in the hush of the crowd, in the steady warmth of the village she had once left behind. Tears welled up, but this time they did not sting. They flowed as naturally as the river, carrying sorrow but also release. When the last of the lanterns disappeared into the distance, the villagers began to leave, but Aya lingered. She sat by the riverbank long after the glow had faded, listening to the water's gentle song. The night was darker without the lanterns, yet strangely, it felt brighter inside her. In the days that followed, Aya found herself staying on. She helped mend the garden her grandmother once tended, clearing the moss from stone paths, replanting flowers that had withered. She joined neighbors in tending to the fields, her city-softened hands slowly becoming rough again, but her heart lighter. At night, she walked along the river, recalling the lights and the sense of belonging they carried. The following year, when the festival returned, Aya no longer felt like a visitor. She prepared lanterns with the others, teaching the children how to fold the delicate paper, her voice soft but steady. Much like her grandmother's once had been. When she placed her lantern in the river that night, she no longer clung to grief. Instead, she smiled, watching it join the countless others, understanding now that the glow was not meant to hold one life alone, but to weave together all lives, past and present, into one flowing current of light. The years passed, and Aya remained in the village. The festival continued, as it had for generations, as it would for generations more. Each time, the lanterns illuminated not only the river but the hearts of those who gathered. Their gentle glow reminded them of what endured, love carried forward, memories cherished, light passed hand to hand, never extinguished. And so the lanterns drifted, year after year, carrying the voices of the past into the embrace of the present, leaving behind a glow that was never truly lost. Aya, standing among the villagers, no longer searched the water for her flame. She had learned that the gentle glow was everywhere on the river, in the people around her, and within herself. Echoes beneath the cherry blossoms. The village of Hanamura lay nestled in a gentle valley, surrounded by rolling hills that, each spring, were draped in a veil of pink and white. Cherry trees lined the river that cut through the heart of the settlement, and when the blossoms fell, the water carried them like 1,000 drifting prayers. It was a place where time seemed to pause, where the whispers of generations could still be heard in the rustling of branches and the footsteps upon stone paths. Among those who called the village home was a young woman named Aoi. She had grown up under the boughs of the cherry trees, their petals. Her companions through childhood, their cycles of bloom and fall marking the rhythm of her life. Yet as she grew older, the blossoms began to feel less like a backdrop and more like a burden, reminders of a world she longed to escape. She had left the village at 20, drawn to the noise and opportunity of the distant city. Her heart set on leaving behind the stillness that had once defined her days. Years passed. The city, with its lights and its endless motion, had offered her ambition, yet it had also hollowed her in ways she could not name. Success in work came, but joy was fleeting, often drowned beneath deadlines and obligations. And then, one spring, a letter arrived, her father's careful handwriting on the envelope, telling her that her mother's health had waned and that it was time to return, if only for a while. Reluctantly, Aoi took the long journey back to Hanamura. As the train slowed and the familiar slopes came into view, she felt a stirring she could not suppress. The trees were in bloom, just as they had been when she was a child, as though they had waited for her all this time. Her mother's condition was frail, but her spirit remained steady. She welcomed Aoi with a smile and a weak embrace, whispering that the blossoms looked more beautiful that year than any she could remember. For Aoi, guilt and grief twined together. She wondered why she had waited so long, why she had allowed distance to grow like a shadow between herself and the place that had once held her whole world. During her stay, Aoi wandered the village, reacquainting herself with its quiet lanes and familiar scents. The cherry trees by the river, now heavy with blossoms, called to her most strongly. She remembered how, as a child, she would sit beneath them with her grandfather, who would tell her that the petals carried voices. "If you listen," he had said once, "you can hear the voices of those who came before us, their joys, their sorrows, their wishes for us." She had laughed then, believing it only a story. But now, standing alone beneath the trees, she found herself listening. It was there she met Haru, a childhood friend she had not seen in years. He was tending to the roots of the old trees, as his family had done for generations. Their reunion was gentle, as though the years apart had been only a passing season. Haru spoke of the village, of how it had changed and how it had stayed the same. He spoke, too, of the blossoms that they had been late the year her grandfather passed, and early the year her grandmother was born. "The trees remember," he said softly. Together, they walked the riverbank as the blossoms began to fall, the petals drifting onto their shoulders, their hair, their open palms. Haru bent to scoop a handful from the water. "They say if you let the petals drift through your fingers, your heart will remember something it had forgotten." Aoi closed her eyes and tried. For a moment, she thought she heard her grandfather's laugh, her grandmother's humming, her mother's voice when it had been strong. Echoes, carried on the spring air. As the days passed, Aoi began to notice how the village held its silence. It was not an empty silence, but one filled with presence, the quiet of morning dew on moss. The hush of sandals on a shrine's stone steps, the sigh of wind through bamboo groves. She began to see that she had never truly listened before. The city had taught her to move quickly, to chase and to strive, but here, time stretched differently, allowing her to breathe. On the night of the full moon, the villagers gathered beneath the cherry trees for the festival. Lanterns were hung, their soft glow mingling with the silver light above. Musicians played the shamisen, the notes blending with the rustling petals that fell like snow. Aoi helped her mother to the riverbank, where they sat together, watching the blossoms float upon the water. Her mother, fragile and luminous in the lantern light, whispered, "Do you hear them, Aoi? The voices beneath the blossoms?" Aoi closed her eyes, and in the murmuring river, in the rustle of petals, she did hear them. Voices layered like threads of ancestors, of loved ones, of the village itself. They spoke not in words but in feelings: warmth, longing, serenity. She realized then that her grandfather's story had never been just a tale. The blossoms were not only flowers, they were memory, presence, connection. Her mother's hand tightened in hers, and Aoi understood what she had been missing in the city. It was not ambition, not noise or movement, but the simple truth that she belonged to something larger, to family, to history, to the land itself. When her mother passed later that spring, Aoi did not leave the village immediately. Instead, she stayed, helping Haru tend to the trees, learning how to fold her life into the rhythms she had once rejected. She swept the shrine steps in the morning, cooked for the elders, and sat by the river at dusk, listening. The city no longer called to her as it once had. Instead, she began to write letters to those she had left behind, telling them of the blossoms, of the way the petals carried voices, of how silence could speak louder than any crowd. And every spring, when the trees bloomed, Aoi walked beneath them and closed her eyes. She heard her mother's laugh now, soft and light as drifting petals. She heard the voices of all who had walked before her, their echoes woven into the air. The blossoms would fall, as they always had, and the river would carry them away. But the voices remained, cradled in the branches, whispered in the petals, breathed in the wind. Aoi had returned not only to her village but to herself. And beneath the cherry blossoms, she finally understood nothing was ever truly lost. Still waters, silent reflections. The lake lay cradled in the hollow of the mountains, its waters so still that the sky seemed to rest within them. At dawn, the surface mirrored the pale blush of morning clouds, while at dusk, it held the deepening indigo of the heavens. Around its edges grew reeds that swayed gently with each breeze, and beyond them, the forest rose like a wall of emerald silence. To those who wandered here, the place seemed suspended outside of time, an untouched fragment of the world where stillness itself had taken root. It was here that Haru returned after many years away. He had grown up in a nearby village but had left as a young man, carrying with him ambitions that reached beyond the mountains. The world outside had been vast, noisy, and endlessly restless. He had studied in great cities, worked in crowded offices, and lived among people who hurried through every hour, as though time itself might vanish if not constantly pursued. Yet with each passing year, Haru felt something eroding within him, an absence he could not name, a silence he could not find. When his father passed away, Haru returned to the village for the first time in over a decade. The funeral was solemn but simple, attended by neighbors who had known his family for generations. Afterward, Haru felt drawn toward the lake, a place he had visited countless times as a child. It was there, beneath the watchful gaze of the mountains, that he had once believed he could hear the voices of the world itself. As he approached, the air grew cooler, touched by the faint fragrance of damp earth and pine. The lake spread before him, unchanged despite the years, its surface shimmering faintly in the late afternoon light. Haru walked along the familiar path and sat upon a flat stone by the shore. The water was as still as he remembered, so still that it seemed to hold its breath. He leaned forward, gazing at his reflection. The man who stared back was older, his face lined with the weight of years spent chasing uncertain goals. Yet beneath the surface of the image, Haru thought he glimpsed something else, a thin ripples of memory, echoes of the boy he had once been. He closed his eyes, and the murmurs of the lake began to rise. In the silence, he remembered his father's quiet presence as they fished at dawn, neither speaking much but sharing the same rhythm of breath. His mother's laughter echoed across the water as she called him in for supper. The rustling reeds had seemed to whisper secrets only the lake could keep. Those memories were not lost, they had been waiting here, beneath the surface, carried in the still waters. As evening fell, Haru remained by the shore. A heron glided across the lake, its wings barely disturbing the mirrored sky. The first stars appeared, scattered like faint lanterns in the twilight. And in that moment, Haru felt something shift within him. The lake was not merely reflecting the heavens above, it was reflecting the silence within his own heart, a silence he had long neglected. He returned each day thereafter, drawn to the lake as though it were a sanctuary. Sometimes he brought offerings of flowers or small stones, leaving them at the edge as gestures of remembrance. Other times, he simply sat, breathing with the rhythm of the water. The villagers saw him and nodded knowingly. They, too, had come here in times of grief, in times of change, seeking the same unspoken solace. One evening, as the moon rose full and silver, Haru met an elder by the water's edge. The old man leaned upon a walking stick, his eyes reflecting the same stillness as the lake itself. He introduced himself as Ren, a caretaker of sorts, though he claimed the lake required no care, only respect. "You've been coming often," Ren said softly. "Do you hear it yet?" Haru frowned. "Hear what?" Ren pointed toward the water. "The silence. It speaks, if you listen long enough." Haru wanted to reply, but the elder lifted a hand, asking for quiet. Together they stood by the shore. The night was calm, filled only with the faint rustle of reeds and the distant cry of an owl. Yet within that stillness, Haru began to sense something deeper, not sound, but presence. The lake seemed to hold within it countless lives, countless moments, as though it remembered everything that had ever been reflected in its waters. "It is not an emptiness," Ren murmured. "It is fullness. The silence is where all voices rest together." Those words lingered long after the elder had gone. Haru found himself thinking of his father, of conversations left unfinished, of gratitude left unspoken. For the first time, he realized he did not need words. The lake was carrying them still, whispering them back in the language of silence. Seasons turned as Haru remained in the village. Spring painted the forest with fresh greens, and the lake mirrored the blossoms of cherry trees along its banks. Summer came with cicadas and drifting clouds. Autumn cloaked the mountains in crimson and gold, their reflections deepening the water's quiet fire. And in winter, snow fell upon the frozen surface, softening the world into hushed whiteness. Through it all, Haru stayed close to the lake, learning the language of its stillness. He began to write, filling notebooks with reflections not of ambition or success, but of silence, of memory, of the unseen threads that bind people to place. He no longer sought the noise of the city. Instead, he listened to the ripples of the water, to the echoes of his own heart, and to the voices that lived beneath the quiet. One spring evening, as blossoms drifted like pale snow across the surface, Haru stood upon the same stone where he had first sat months before. The water shimmered with soft pinks and silvers, holding both sky and memory. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I am home." The words vanished into the air, but the silence of the lake received them. In its still waters, they would live on it as sound, but as reflection. And so, Haru remained. The world beyond the mountains might rush and roar. But here the waters stayed still, carrying within them all that had been, all that was, and all that would come. Beneath the silence, life continued. Beneath the stillness, everything endured. Twilight over the mountain path. Twilight bathed the mountain path in a soft, fading light. The shadows of the trees stretched long, falling across the slopes as if the entire mountain were holding its breath. The narrow trail twisted gently, the moss beneath one's feet soaking in the light. Haru walked slowly along the path, careful with each step yet feeling a lightness in his heart. Sunlight filtered through the trees from above, golden and warm, stretching his shadow far behind him. Haru had returned to this path after a long journey. It was the path he had walked with his grandfather as a child. His grandfather spoke little but taught him the joy of walking and the beauty of feeling in tune with nature. To young Haru, every pebble underfoot, every whiff of moss, every bird call had seemed vivid and extraordinary. Over time, life in the city had pulled him away from the quietness of the mountains. Yet now, standing in the twilight glow of this familiar path, those sensations came rushing back. He paused at a small shrine nestled beside the trail. Moss-covered steps led up to it, and the sunlight seemed to pool upon its roof. His grandfather had taught him to pause and offer a prayer here before continuing. Haru took a deep breath and pressed his palms together, feeling a quiet reverence settle over him. Beyond the shrine, the path grew steeper. The wind rustled the trees, creating a soft, melodic whisper. The fading light turned the shadows a deeper hue, and from the distant valley, he could hear the gentle murmur of a stream and the occasional bird call, emphasizing the mountain's profound silence. As he walked, Haru reflected inwardly. He remembered the joy of being fully present in nature, a joy lost amidst the rush of city life. With every step, it returned mossy scents, the cool touch of stone beneath his feet, the sound of the wind weaving through branches. These small elements began to fill him with calm. Soon, the trail opened to a ridge, offering a panoramic view of mountains and sky. The sunset painted the western sky crimson, gilding the clouds with gold. The overlapping silhouettes of the mountains grew deeper, and the valley below slowly welcomed the night. Haru stood silently, drinking in the breathtaking scene. A soft shuffle behind him drew his attention. An elderly monk approached, leaning gently on a staff. He smiled, serene, and said, "Those who walk this path find the stillness hidden deep within their hearts." Haru nodded, standing alongside the monk. Words were unnecessary. The silence between them was comfortable, even soothing. Twilight gathered the mountain path, valleys, and distant streams into a single, quiet embrace, as if the world itself were exhaling. Night gradually descended. The monk departed, leaving Haru alone. Stars began to appear, and the moon cast a gentle glow over the trail. Small lights flickered in the distance, perhaps from village houses, or lanterns near secluded shrines. Haru moved forward toward them. With each step, an unfamiliar tranquility expanded within him. The path asked no hurry, allowing wind, leaves, and starlight to envelop him fully. In the stillness, he felt his past, his future, and this very moment converge. As he descended toward the village, lights grew closer, and the soft glow from windows harmonized perfectly with the path's serenity. Haru inhaled deeply, his heart satisfied. He felt both the end of a journey and the beginning of something new. Before stepping into the village, he turned to look back. The twilight sky, now deep indigo, stretched over the mountains. Within that quiet scene lived the peace he had felt as a child, the calm that city life had almost erased. "This is the path of my heart," Haru whispered. He continued walking, letting the night enfold him. The wind stirred the trees, and a distant stream whispered. The quiet mountain path, unchanged and eternal, received all who journeyed along it, cradling their hearts in silence. The pine tree's silent song. On the edge of a quiet village, nestled between mist-covered hills and the gentle curve of a silver stream, stood a lone pine tree. Its trunk was thick and weathered, a testament to centuries of wind and sun. The villagers called it Kokura no Matsu, the heart pine, for its presence seemed to pulse with life even when the forest around it lay silent. Every morning, a yame would come to this tree. She was a young woman with hair dark as the night and eyes that held the calm of a still pond. Since childhood, the heart pine had been her secret refuge. She remembered sitting beneath its branches with her grandmother, listening to stories of spirits that whispered to those patient enough to hear. The tree has its song, her grandmother had said, but it is silent to the careless ear. Only those who truly listen can hear the melody. Ayame had returned after a long absence. Life in the city had been loud, filled with clamor and urgency, and her heart had grown heavy with the noise of people who never paused to breathe. Now, walking along the winding path that led to the pine, she felt the tension of her days begin to lift. Each step along the moss-covered stones, each brush of the wind against her cheeks, seemed to carry away fragments of her worries. The pine tree rose before her like a guardian, its long needles swaying softly in the morning breeze. Ayame placed her hand on its bark, rough and warm from the rising sun, and closed her eyes. She listened. At first, there was only the ordinary rhythm of the forest, the distant murmur of the stream, the quiet rustle of leaves, the occasional caw of a crow. But gradually, beneath these sounds, something else emerged, a subtle, steady rhythm, like a pulse, or a breath. It was the song of the tree. Ayame had heard it before, faint and delicate, and now it filled her mind. It was not a song of notes or words, but of silence itself, kind of silence that feels alive, as if the world is exhaling in unison with you. In that silence, memories arose: her grandmother's laughter, the warm scent of tea on winter mornings, the first snow she had ever touched. The song did not merely exist in the tree, Ayame realized it existed in her as well. The day passed slowly. Sunlight poured through the pine needles, painting the ground with patterns of light and shadow. Ayame wandered around the tree, tracing its roots and leaning against its trunk, until the golden haze of evening fell upon the village. Lanterns glowed faintly in the distance, and the mountains beyond the valley took on the soft lilac of twilight. That night, she dreamed. She was walking in a vast forest of towering pines, all of them humming in perfect harmony. Each tree's song mingled with the others, creating a melody so serene it made her chest ache with longing. A figure approached, an old woman with hair like silver silk. It was her grandmother. "You have returned," her grandmother said, her voice blending seamlessly with the whisper of the wind. "You are ready to listen." Ayame awoke at dawn. The pine tree awaited her as though it had never moved, its needles glistening with dew. She sat beneath it, breathing in the scent of earth and pine resin. This was not simply a tree, it was a companion, a teacher, a keeper of memories. She realized she could carry its song within her, and in doing so, bring its quiet into the restless world outside the forest. Days turned to weeks. Ayame visited the heart pine every morning, sometimes sitting for hours, sometimes walking the nearby paths, letting the music of the tree guide her steps. Villagers began to notice a change in her demeanor. She moved with the calm certainty of one who had discovered a secret source of strength. People would bow slightly as she passed, sensing that she carried a lightness, a tranquility they could not name. One afternoon, a traveler arrived in the village. He was a young man with a sketchbook tucked under his arm. His eyes were wide with curiosity, and he spoke little, but Ayame felt a kindred spirit in his silence. She guided him to the heart pine, and for the first time, shared with someone the song that had shaped her life. The traveler closed his eyes beneath the branches, and Ayame watched as his face softened, as if a burden had lifted. When he finally spoke, his voice was hushed, reverent. "I hear it," he said. "It is the silence itself. It is peace." Ayame smiled. In that moment, she understood something deeper. The heart pine's song was never truly confined to the tree. It was a gift to those who sought stillness, a melody woven into the very air and earth, waiting to be discovered. Seasons passed. The snow came, blanketing the village and the pine in white. Spring followed, bringing cherry blossoms and the first warmth of sun on tender skin. Through all these changes, the heart pine remained, its song constant and patient. Ayame grew older, but the tree's music remained with her, a quiet companion over time. And when she finally left the village, traveling to distant cities and lands beyond the mountains, she carried the pine's silent song in her heart. In crowded streets, she would pause for a breath, closing her eyes to listen, and the melody returned, as vivid and gentle as the day she first heard it beneath the branches. The tree's song had taught her that silence is never empty, it is full of presence, of life, of love. It had shown her how to carry peace within herself, how to walk the world with quiet strength, and how to share that gift with others. And so, the heart pine remained, standing tall on the mountain path, its needles whispering in the wind, offering its silent song to all who came to listen. Footsteps on a misty shore. The shore at dawn was neither sea nor land, neither silence nor sound. Mist drifted low across the waves, softening every outline until the horizon vanished. The tide breathed with steady rhythm, as though the world itself were exhaling. Keiko returned to this coastal village after many years in the city. The weight of crowded trains, neon-lit nights, and endless noise had pressed upon her until she could no longer breathe freely. She longed for something quieter, something remembered the fragrance of pine, the taste of salt, the calm mornings she had known as a child. Her grandmother's house stood just as she had left it, wooden beams weathered, the veranda looking out toward the sea. The rooms felt hollow, yet carried a faint warmth, as if the old woman's presence lingered in the corners. That first night, Keiko dreamed of her grandmother's voice. The shore remembers your steps, even when the sea erases them. The words, like a lullaby, stayed with her when she woke. At dawn, she walked barefoot across the wet sand. Each step left a clear impression, but the next wave swept it away. She remembered running here as a girl, her grandmother waiting by the rocks, the mist wrapping them both in stillness. Now, standing alone, she listened. The tide's rhythm was a language without words, patient and eternal. For several mornings, Keiko noticed other footprints beside her own. They were larger, deeper, and angled toward the water. Sometimes they curved into the mist and disappeared, leaving her to wonder who else walked here in such quiet hours. One morning, she met him. Ren was a fisherman who had lived by the sea his entire life. His hands were roughened by nets, his face lined by sun and wind. He greeted her with a nod, and together they walked without speaking, their footsteps side by side. In time, words came. He spoke of storms that had taken boats and men, of the years he had watched the sea change its moods yet remain the same. She told him of the city, its bright nights, its endless rush, the way it left her feeling hollow. "The sea teaches us not to hurry," Ren said. "The tide never rushes. It moves together with the moon." They began to meet each morning, sharing silence as much as conversation. Ren told her of his late wife, who had once walked this same shore with him at dawn. Though she was gone, he returned every day. "The sand still remembers her feet," he said softly. Keiko felt her grandmother in the same way, though her steps were long erased. The place itself carried her memory. The mist, the tide, even the silence bore traces of those who had walked before. As spring advanced, the mornings grew brighter, yet the mist still gathered each dawn, veiling the shore in silver. Keiko no longer felt it as emptiness. It became instead a veil of protection, allowing her to listen more deeply. She realized her return was not an escape from the city, but a search for connection, for memory, for voices carried on the tide. One morning, standing beside Ren, she looked at their footprints dissolving into foam. "They vanish so quickly," she said. Ren smiled. "Yes. But they remain in the sand beneath, unseen. Just as we remain in each other's hearts." The waves rolled forward, erasing the marks, but Keiko no longer felt sadness. She understood now the meaning of footsteps was not in their permanence but in the act of walking, of leaving traces even if unseen. She stayed in the village through the spring. The mornings became a ritual, rising with the first light, stepping into the mist, hearing the sea's patient song. Her loneliness lifted, replaced by something quieter, steadier, like the tide itself. In the hush of dawn, walking side by side with another soul. Keiko discovered a truth her grandmother had once known: footprints vanish, yet the shore remembers. And in that remembering, nothing is ever truly lost. On the misty shore, every step was fleeting. And every step was eternal. Harmony in the falling leaves. Autumn came softly to the mountain village. The trees along the temple path flamed with red and gold, their leaves drifting down in steady silence. Each morning, the air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. For the villagers, this season was not merely an end but a reminder of rhythm, the cycle of growth, fading, and renewal. Into this season, Aiko returned after years away in the city. She had left her village young, searching for excitement, but the endless noise and rushing streets had left her weary. Her father's letter had arrived in autumn, asking her to come before winter. She came back unsure, yet sensing a pull she could no longer resist. Her father greeted her at their home on the edge of the valley. He was smaller now, bent with age, but his eyes lit warmly. Though they had spoken little over the years, he showed no reproach, only quiet relief. That night, they shared a meal by the hearth, speaking little but sitting close, the silence gentler than it had been in years. The next morning, Aiko rose before dawn and walked the path she had once hurried along as a child. Stone lanterns stood moss-covered, torii weathered by decades of rain. Now she saw them differently. The hush of leaves falling through the air felt like music, unhurried and whole. At the temple gate, the great ginkgo shimmered gold. Beneath it, Master Daisetsu, the old monk, swept fallen leaves into neat rows. He bowed when he saw her. "You've returned," he said softly. Aiko bowed back. "It has been a long time." He smiled. "Time falls like these leaves. No matter how far they drift, they always find their way home." She stayed to help him sweep. The sound of bristles on stone, mingling with the wind through branches, felt like part of the same melody. For the first time in years, she sensed her heart moving in rhythm with her surroundings. In the days that followed, Aiko visited the fields with her father, where rice stalks lay bundled after harvest. She greeted neighbors who remembered her more clearly than she remembered them. Life moved slowly here, yet its slowness was not emptiness. It was fullness, a steadiness she had forgotten. By the river, she met Haru, a boy skipping stones. Curious, he asked if she was from the city. When she said yes, he nodded seriously. "The river remembers everyone who leaves," he told her, echoing the words of her grandmother long ago. Watching him cast ripples that carried fallen leaves outward, Aiko felt a quiet truth settle inside her. Memory was carried by places, not only by people. Evenings grew colder, the smell of roasted chestnuts and smoke filling the air. Aiko and her father sat together by the fire, sometimes speaking, often not. She realized reconciliation did not always mean explaining or apologizing. Sometimes it meant only sharing space until silence became companionable. As the autumn festival neared, the villagers prepared lanterns to line the temple path. Children painted them in bright red and gold, their laughter carried by the wind. On the night of the festival, hundreds of lanterns glowed like stars fallen to earth. The path shimmered with reflected light, while leaves spun downward as if joining the dance. Music of flutes and drums floated gently, and the villagers gathered in stillness. Master Daisetsu spoke. Each season brings harmony of its own. Spring sings of beginnings, summer of growth, autumn of release, and winter of stillness. Tonight, as the leaves fall, let us remember that harmony is not in holding tightly, but in letting go with grace. His words sank into Aiko's heart. Tears rose unbidden, not of sorrow alone, but of recognition. She had left seeking something vast, yet here, in the falling leaves, she found what she had missed. The next morning, she returned to the temple path alone. Lanterns had gone out, but the stones were carpeted with golden leaves. Beneath the ginkgo, she whispered, "I understand now." Her voice vanished into the air, yet the rustle of branches answered her. It was not silence but completion. Winter would soon arrive. She knew she must return to the city, yet she would no longer carry only weariness. She would carry the harmony she had rediscovered, the sweep of a broom, the music of falling leaves, the wisdom of rivers and lanterns. For every leaf that falls, though gone, contributes to the forest's song. And as Aiko walked back down the path, her footsteps blended with the countless others before her, part of a timeless melody that would continue long after she had gone. Beneath the sakura sky, spring had returned to the valley. From the first dawn of April, the air carried the fragrance of damp earth and a faint sweetness from unseen buds, preparing to open. The hills, still shadowed with winter's memory, began to wear a veil of pink. Along the riverbanks and the temple grounds, the sakura awakened, as if the sky itself had descended in petals. For the people of the village, this season was more than beauty, it was a reminder of cycles too vast to be controlled, and too fragile to ignore. Aya had not walked these paths in years. Once, as a child, she ran through the orchards barefoot, gathering blossoms in her hands, not caring that they fell and scattered the moment the wind blew. She had left, convinced that the world beyond would offer permanence, something stronger than petals carried off in an instant. Yet now she returned, older, with lines of experience at the corners of her eyes, carrying questions her younger self never imagined. The train left her at a quiet station, where only a handful of passengers stepped onto the platform. The mountains embraced the village, the river hummed softly at their feet, and the scent of blossoms reached her before she even saw them. A flock of sparrows rose suddenly from the eaves of the station roof, their flight like brushstrokes across the pale sky. Aya tightened her grip on her bag and breathed deeply. She had come home. Her father's house stood at the edge of the village, half hidden by trees. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, the familiar sound startling her with its unchanged timbre. Beyond, the yard was littered with fallen petals, each one delicate and yet innumerable, forming a carpet as soft as memory itself. Her father, now thinner and slower, emerged from the veranda. His face broke into a smile small, restrained, but warmer than any word. "You've arrived," he said simply. "Yes, father," Aya answered. The pause that followed was filled not with distance but with the weight of time years they had spent apart, now folded into a single moment of recognition. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and old books. The garden outside, which her mother once tended, was beginning to bloom again. Aya placed her things down and helped her father prepare tea. As they moved side by side, the silence between them was less awkward than she feared. It was like walking through a grove where roots intertwined underground, unseen but still strong. That evening, she wandered outside. The moon was rising, pale against the deepening sky, while petals floated like drifting stars. Standing beneath the sakura trees, she felt both infinitesimal and embraced, a part of something eternal yet fleeting. In the following days, Aya found herself drawn to the temple at the heart of the village. Its gates were framed by ancient cherry trees whose branches arched above the path like a tunnel of pink light. There she met the old monk, Shunryu, who had guided generations through quiet wisdom. "You have returned," he said when she bowed before him. "I have," Aya replied. "But I don't know what I seek." Shunryu's eyes were like still water. "Then perhaps you seek nothing. And perhaps that is enough." They sat together beneath the blossoms. Wind passed, lifting petals into eddies that swirled around them before settling gently upon their robes. Aya found herself speaking of the city, the noise, the endless striving, the sense that no matter how much she reached for, everything slipped away. Shunryu listened without interruption. At last, he spoke. "Sakura fall because they must. Their beauty lies not in resistance, but in surrender. To live beneath their sky is to learn that loss is not failure, but part of the song." Aya absorbed his words in silence, watching a single petal descend into the pond, its surface rippling outward. She wondered if she had been fleeing the truth all along, that transience was not a curse, but a gift. As the festival approached, the village prepared lanterns and painted banners. Children ran through the streets with laughter like bells, while elders tied charms to branches, whispering prayers of gratitude. Aya joined her father in sweeping the path before their home. With each stroke of the broom, petals gathered into little drifts, only to scatter again in the wind. That night, when the lanterns were lit, the village glowed with a soft radiance. The river mirrored the lights, carrying them downstream like stars. Aya walked among the people she once knew, greeted with smiles of recognition, though many faces had aged, and some were missing entirely. At the temple steps, music rose, flutes and drums in a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of spring. Dancers moved beneath the blossoms, their sleeves and sashes flowing like streams of color. Aya watched, her chest tightening with a strange, gentle ache. She thought of her mother, who had loved this season most of all. She thought of promises unspoken, words she never dared to say. Her father stood beside her, gazing upward at the blossoms. His voice, when it came, was soft. Your mother always believed the sakura carried messages from those who had gone before us. Every petal, she said, is a whisper. Aya closed her eyes. The wind stirred, and petals brushed her cheeks. For a moment, she imagined they were her mother's hands, warm and fleeting. Days passed in a rhythm of quiet tasks, helping her father, visiting neighbors, tending the garden. Yet beneath everything was the constant presence of the blossoms. She walked under their shade in the morning, their fragrance mingling with the mist. She sat beneath them in the evening, listening to the river's lullaby. And every night, when the moon rose, the petals glowed like pale fire, reminding her of impermanence and grace. One morning, she found Haru, the neighbor's boy, trying to catch petals in his hands. He grew frustrated as they slipped through his fingers. They always fall away, he complained. Aya knelt beside him. That's because they are not meant to be kept. They're meant to be seen, felt, and remembered. Haru looked doubtful. But then they're gone. She smiled softly. Yes. And that's what makes them precious. Her own words lingered in her heart long after. Perhaps they were not meant only for the boy. When the blossoms began to thin, their branches showing more sky than flower, Aya felt the season turning. Soon the wind would grow stronger, the petals fewer, and the green of summer would emerge. Yet instead of sadness, she felt a deep calm. On her final day, she walked once more to the temple path. The ground was thick with petals, a soft river of pink and white flowing toward the gate. She stood beneath the largest tree, placing her hand upon its rough bark. "Thank you," she whispered. The wind rose, and a cascade of petals descended, surrounding her in a storm of fragile beauty. She closed her eyes, letting them rest upon her hair, her shoulders, her hands. In that moment, she was no longer separate from the world, but part of its fleeting harmony. When she opened her eyes, she felt lighter. She knew she would return to the city, to its endless demands. But she also knew she carried something with her now, something the sakura had given freely, something no noise or ambition could erase. She walked back toward her father's house, her steps steady, her breath aligned with the rhythm of falling leaves. Above, the sky was clear, vast, and filled with drifting petals. And beneath the sakura sky, Aya felt at last that she had come home not just to her village, but to herself.